Killer worms are one of the unsung staples of sci-fi and fantasy movies. You see them in many classic fantasy films like The Empire Strikes Back, Big Trouble in Little China, Dune, Alien, King Kong, Beetlejuice. They're just completely prevalent in any fantasy world that a filmmaker can dream up. Some of the best B movies are about evil man-eating worms. You got Tremors, The Monster That Challenged the World, Night of the Creeps, Galaxy of Terror, Shivers, and what I consider to be one of the most underrated films in the genre, The Deadly Spawn, which is the movie review for today's episode. Released in 1983, The Deadly Spawn is the first and only filmmaking effort of director Douglas McKeown, which is a shame because for his first ever film, he does a really good job with it, especially with the tiny budget of $25,000. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what is known as a shoestring of a budget. Anyways, the film opens up in the same identical way to pretty much every 50s sci-fi B-movie. A meteor crash lands on Earth somewhere in the good old US of A, and a couple of camping teenagers with equally campy acting skills are eaten alive by the creature that awakens from the meteor. We cut to a nice matte painting miniature house where we see a grumpy old married couple exchange some generic dialogue before the husband heads into the basement to investigate a disturbance, and is brutally killed by the same monster that crawled out of the meteor. The wife goes to investigate only to have her entire head chomped to pieces by a huge pink alien worm with teeth. After that scene, we are introduced to the characters who we will actually stick with until the end of the movie. For a movie with such a simple premise, it actually does a decent job of setting up these characters and making us actually care a little bit about them. The kid, who happens to be a horror and monster movie fanatic just like myself, heads down into the basement to scare the light electrician, only to be greeted by the worm and its offspring feeding on the butchered heads of his own parents. Wow, poor kid. The rest of the movie deals with the family and the older brother's friends trying to survive against the Deadly Spawn's onslaught. Despite being insanely low budget and campy at times, The Deadly Spawn actually has a pretty solid script. The characters are memorable and likable, the acting from most of the cast is pretty good, and the movie does a great job of pacing and building up the intensity throughout its runtime until the end, where all fucking hell breaks loose. It's also interesting to note that the original title of this film was The Return of the Aliens, The Deadly Spawn. Now I'm going to assume that all the people watching this video have seen the 1979 classic Ridley Scott film Alien. This film was originally marketed to be a sequel to that film, but in reality the two films really have nothing in common, except for the monsters, who have no eyes and have massive rows of sharp teeth. But this was to be expected, since Aliens was still 3 years away. My absolute favorite thing about this film is the special effects. The gore effects and death scenes are fantastic. The scene with the parents' heads being eaten by all the baby worms is some of the best gore effects I've ever seen in an ultra low budget film. The worms themselves are pretty great looking too, though since this film had such a small budget, I imagine they had to reuse some of the same puppets again. The gore, the worms, the deaths, the atmosphere are all excellent, and they portray real craftsmanship with such a minuscule budget. The only bad thing I can really say about this film is that there aren't more Deadly Spawn movies. They've made franchises out of every other 80s horror monster movie, so why not this one? It has a cult following, so why just one movie? I know people have heard of this movie. In the video game Splatterhouse 2, the first boss is a huge worm that bears an uncanny resemblance to the worm from this movie. What I'm saying here is that this movie is criminally underrated. It combines cliches from 50s B movies and mixes them with the gore and attitude of the 80s. It's a B-movie classic that any self-respecting monster movie lover should go out and get. And maybe the fact that it's not even gonna be remade or there are no sequels is maybe a good thing. I think it's safe to say that The Deadly Spawn exists in a world all in its own. There is a Blu-ray version that was just released on Amazon, so I recommend getting that DVD. The Deadly Spawn is a great 80s splatter monster movie, and you have to see it if you love creature features and if you love splatter movies. This has been my 6th B-movie theater entry. Seriously, people, see this movie. Please. I highly recommend it. You won't be disappointed. That's all I gotta say, folks.